Putin escalates, high-speed rail founders, and Kanye melts down. We'll discuss all this and more on this edition of The Editors. I'm Rich Lowry, and I'm joined as always by the Right Honorable Charles C.W. Cook, the Sage of Authenticity Woods, Jim Garrity, and Phil Klein. You are, of course, listening to a National Review podcast. Our sponsors this episode are NetChoice, Moik, and Segura. More about them in due course. If for some reason you're not already following us on a streaming service, you can find us everywhere from Spotify to iTunes. If you like what you hear here, please consider giving us a glowing 5-star review on iTunes. If you don't like what you hear here, please forget I said anything. So before we do anything else, a quick word from NetChoice, a trade organization dedicated to free expression and free enterprise online. Americans expect our tech companies to keep us safe, secure, and private online. We use tools like app stores with confidence because we can trust companies to filter out as many scams and unsecure apps as possible. But a bill moving through Congress, the Open App Markets Act, would force companies to allow apps that don't meet their security standards to be hosted in their app stores, leaving Americans exposed, confused, and vulnerable. American tech companies spend a lot of money and time on research, security protocols, and tools to minimize online scams and criminal activity from bad actors. Don't let Congress make us vulnerable online. Tell your senator to vote no on the Open App Markets Act. So, Jim Garrity, we have big events in Ukraine again. The Ukrainians, they didn't technically take responsibility, but they spiked the proverbial football in the end zone repeatedly over this bombing of this bridge connecting Crimea to Russia proper. They damaged the bridge severely, didn't take it out entirely. Huge humiliation to Vladimir Putin, whose regime and whose annexation of Crimea was are caught up in this bridge. I believe he drove a truck himself over this bridge at the time of its opening, and he's reacted by launching a massive missile strike, the biggest of the war, against various cities across Ukraine, including Kyiv again. No pretense that these were military targets, hit playgrounds, hit various power stations, just a way to purely punitive attacks. So looks like the war is escalating yet again. What do you make of it?
Rich, I keep seeing people who are smart and who know a lot more about Russia than I do keep insisting that as bad as things seem, and as much as we see Vladimir Putin rather casually mentioning the possibility of using nuclear weapons, Putin would never use a nuclear weapon because, quote, it makes no sense, or it's not rational, or there just wouldn't be any battlefield advantage to Russia. And I hope they're right. I think they're right, but I'm not 100% certain, in part because the invasion of Ukraine didn't make much sense, and that wasn't terribly rational, and that didn't seem to offer a particularly clear advantage to Russia, and they went ahead and did that anyway. We're all trying to guess what's going on inside Putin's head, and I guess the scenario that has me particularly nervous, one is that clearly, as bad as things are going for the Russian army right now, and as much as Putin keeps having these humiliating, we had the Russian flagship sank, and all kinds of things have gone wrong for him. Putin clearly believes, at minimum, the best case scenario he's got is to try to freeze out Europe through the cutting off energy supplies. And the idea at some point this will make Europe come to the bargaining table, or make Europe force Ukraine to come to the negotiating table and end the war on terms that are fairly favorable to Russia. I do wonder if Putin looks at that and says, if at the end, like Putin's end game or his idea of victory is putting as much pressure on Europe as possible, then I wonder if he can talk himself into using a tactical nuke. And one of the things that I felt was a huge deal last week, I feel like a lot of people just kind of, saw it, realized how weird it was, and just kind of pretended not to notice, was President Biden just kind of blurting out talk of Armageddon and that we're the closest to nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 at a Democratic fundraiser, right in the middle of his remarks. Like if Biden really thinks this is the sort of thing you address the country from the Oval Office over.
Exactly.
And he just got, it's I feel kind of like Armageddon. And how are we going to get Putin to take an off-ramp? Like if he really is thinking that, and my fear is that he saw some either, in the presidential daily briefing or something that he was briefed has that on his mind and has him, feeling understandable anxiety about this. And like I said, no, I don't think anyone thinks Putin's going to, suddenly nuke New York and Washington. I think the fear is that, Putin and Russian leadership can talk themselves into believing, well, if we just set off one tactical nuke and we do it on a mountaintop, or we do it over the Black Sea, or we do it high enough in the altitude that it causes a giant electromagnetic pulse, we do something. And what it does is it intimidates Ukraine, it intimidates Europe, and it intimidates the world. Now, I don't think I think the Ukrainians, the moment that happens, they're like, screw it, we're fighting all the way to Moscow. You guys, you nuke our country, we're on. But I don't know how the Europeans would respond. I also think Americans would be freaked out, understandably. Markets would tank. And I don't know if it'll look like the final minutes of Miracle Mile, but I think like a lot of people in New York and Washington might want to get out of those cities, not knowing how this is going to escalate. It would be, on par with 9/11 or COVID-19 as these giant era-defining, terrifying events. And I kind of wonder if a whole bunch of European countries would say, you know what, Zelensky, this has gotten completely out of control. Give him 4 provinces and let's get this thing over with. Mm-hmm. So that's the scenario where I can see Russia going nuclear. And I kind of feel like if, God forbid, that happened, and again, I don't think it's going to happen, but I keep asking people, how worried are you about, on a scale of 1 to 100, and I get people saying, 30% chance. Some people say 60% chance. A lot of people, this is suddenly is not unthinkable. Mm-hmm. And I really kind of have this thing, like, if this happens, God forbid, in November or December or sometime in late winter or spring, we're going to say, why didn't we do more in October to try to deter the Russians from doing this?
Yeah. So it just seems to me, once you're down this road of using these conventional strikes as a means to punish and terrorize the Ukrainians, it's not that radical a step to go nuclear. And it at least has to be, has to be part of his calculation, something that he's at least thinking about. And I'm not sure it would have the effect that he would hope. Certainly a battlefield nuke, and these sort of terror attacks against cities usually don't work. They galvanize the population. That was the history of World War II up to the time of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even there, we had to do it twice. And the Ukrainians, of course, just sound more resolute, but are asking for even more weapons from the West now, with an emphasis on anti-missile interceptors. But Phil, it was bizarre, this Biden comment about nuclear Armageddon. As Jim says, one, you do it in an address to the nation. 2, you don't do it like deeply embedded in your remarks at a fundraiser where people are drinking Chablis and eating, mini chicken skewers or whatever. And after all the typical boilerplate about how terrible Republicans are, you're like, oh, by the way, it's the most dangerous time in this country since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Biden hasn't said anything, we're only Tuesday, and he did this late last week or over the weekend. But he hasn't said anything about it since.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this gets at something I wrote a while back, that Biden sometimes seems to forget that he's not still a senator. Now, when you're a senator, it's quite common. You're in the Senate, you're outside at the elevators, gaggling with reporters. They start asking you questions. And he was, particularly Biden, was used to just riffing and talking with reporters and so forth. He was a very frequent guest on Sunday shows where you're more of a pundit, and the difficulty he has, and I think this happens to a lot of senators that become presidents. Obama used to do it sometimes, where you act like you're sort of there to be a pundit and an observer, as opposed to somebody who's, if you're a senator and you sort of say there could be nuclear Armageddon, yeah, it's sort of maybe a headline in, The Hill or something, or, Politico or a few DC centric publications. But when you're the president, it has these global implications. And in many sense, the public statements of a president can be policy. It could be used in a good way when Reagan talked unequivocally of the evil empire and said, tear down this wall and so forth. Or it could just be really bad when you're just riffing about, and your president riffing about the prospect, the non-zero chance of nuclear Armageddon.
Yeah. So, Charlie, this is a little reminiscent of the Blitz again, which galvanized the British people rather than convincing them that they had to surrender and go away.
I think that's a good analogy. And it is amazing to me that the bad actors in the world have not learned this lesson yet. But apparently they haven't. And of course, if they learned the lesson, they probably wouldn't be bad actors in the first place. We will have to relearn the lessons that we all learned over centuries. I think one of the reasons that this is alarming is that it is always accompanied by the suggestion that the leader of Russia is unhinged. And if you step back, absent the possession of nuclear weapons, Russia would be not a great power. Absent the possession of nuclear weapons, Russia's performance in Ukraine would have exposed to the world that Russia is not a great power. But they always have that in their back pocket. And it's so cataclysmic as a prospect that it makes you recalibrate your own expectations and also your behavior.
Yeah, that's a key thing that people tend to forget. People tend to think of deterrence. Okay, deterrence is the balance of terror during the Cold War. It keeps you from powers from nuking one another. But deterrence is more than that. You can use nuclear weapons to deter someone from taking very conventional options. And Putin has done that already to some extent in Ukraine. They're giving him the MiGs and just carefully balancing what we're giving the Ukrainians. The possibility of tipping this thing into a nuclear conflict is in the back or the forefront of our minds, and has been the back and the forefront of our mind in all those decisions.
Yes. And then if you add into the calculation that the person who is in charge of nuclear weapons is potentially either mad or has been backed into a corner and sees only one way out, then it becomes even more alarming and unpredictable. And then you start to understand why it is that the lessons of history are rarely learned, because we're not always talking about rational actors. There's a tendency, and I say this with great humility because foreign policy is not my area, but there is a tendency on the part of people who study foreign policy closely to filter the events in the real world through textbooks and to evaluate them according to these predetermined models of realism or internationalism or what you will. And that's useful. And I'm not knocking it per se, but they're not always useful models when you're dealing with unique situations or sui generis actors or lunatics. And that's the worry here, is that we are headed for an irrational but massively consequential, indeed catastrophic move.
Jim Garrity, ask a question to you. You are the president of the United States in this hypothetical scenario, and you wake up one morning and Vladimir Putin has used a couple tactical nukes on the battlefield. Do you respond with a nuclear strike on a Russian asset somewhere, yes or no?
Absolutely not, because we have more than enough capabilities to strike Russia through non-nuclear means, not just in conventional weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine, but we have enormous cyber capabilities. We can shut off the internet in Russia. We can shut off the power in Russia. We can take down Russian satellites in orbit. We have all kinds of ways of hitting the Russians that do not involve launching U.S. nuclear weapons. And I understand in some war game, the U.S. ended up hitting Belarus because they were trying to find some equivalent target or something like that. This is not the time to start acting out the day after you can hit Russia in ways that will not open up the nuclear can of worms.
So I totally agree with you. And since that was such an easy and authoritative answer for you, let me try to push it. Let me try to push you further, Jim, and see if I can get any uncertainty here. So you're president of the United States. You wake up one morning, and Vladimir Putin has nuked Kiev and killed President Zelensky. Do you respond? Do you engage in a nuclear response?
That one is tougher. I want to take the temperature of NATO. I think
probably quite hot.
Oh, you're a really prudent president, Jim.
Yeah, no, I think so. Here's the other great irony: is my younger son wanted to try out for Model UN. I said that if he plays the U.S. in the opening round, you should say, we are launching a first strike on all Russian military assets all around the globe simultaneously. Better dead than red, commies, and just see how the kids react. No, but in this case, here's the thing. Once you start going down the nuclear game, they're going to hit back with everything they've got, and that's the end of the United States as we know it. So as long as you can keep it, by the way, from what we're seeing in Ukraine, our tech works really well. Their tech doesn't work very well. If we can take out the Russian Navy without, using nukes, let's do that. And that's a good way of kicking them in the crotch metaphorically, and not having to have mushroom clouds over American cities.
Phil Klein, but both questions to you. TAC nuke and Kyiv, would you respond with a nuclear strike somewhere in either of those scenarios?
I think that the one thing that's clear is that Biden has to make it clear that we'd be willing to respond with a nuclear response. Clearly, there is, during the Cold War, the mutually assured destruction doctrine was basically the thing that prevented even USSR at the height of its radicalism from actually deciding to go nuclear. But that's really only credible if there's a belief on Russia that there might actually be a nuclear response. That, of course, is different from whether or not you'd actually do it. And I think that it kind of depends on what happens. I think that the consequences of sort of a nuclear escalation are so high that you have to think long and hard about whether or not the use of some sort of tactical nuke, whatever that actually would mean in practice, is it sort of a tactical nuke ends in, lands in some field somewhere and doesn't do as much damage, or doesn't do that much damage from a sort of standard bombing, or is it sort of completely, mass genocide that's carried out by this nuclear weapon?
And some of these tactics are really, really small and, be sort of indistinguishable from, you could take out a bridge with them, right? And, you'd have fallout and it would be crossing a threshold that hasn't been crossed since World War II, but it's not, a city buster necessarily.
Yeah. So you have to really think about that, saying, are you looking at what the actual effect is rather than the taboo against using any nuclear weapons? But like I said, you kind of want Putin to think that there's a credible threat, that there's going to be a furious nuclear response. And that has to, if there's a part of his brain that is sort of has some degree of restraint and pragmatism, then maybe he just doesn't take that step. I mean, he's also trying to portray the Ukrainians and the West as terrorists, and it kind of hurts whatever case he wants to make if he starts using nukes.
So, Charlie, so far I agree with everything that's been said. Can you please try to say something I disagree with?
Well, I don't know if I can say something you disagree with. I would add my voice to the tactical analysis that Jim offered up, but I would just add a moral analysis and remind everyone that we're not at war here. And I think that whatever case there is for using nuclear weapons when the United States is at war or is threatened simply doesn't exist in this case. We obviously can't go down this rabbit hole, but I think our bombings in Japan were justified. And the reason for that is that Japan started the war.
Mm-hmm.
Japan had attacked the United States, and all sorts of innocent American soldiers would have died en masse in trying to bring a conclusion to a war that they never wanted.
Yeah, you look at how just horrific fighting was in Okinawa, and then you're like really going to take it to the Japanese homeland.
Right. And I think it was the right decision for that reason. But 5 years later, when there was some discussion of using nuclear weapons in Korea, Harry Truman gave a press conference where he said they're within our arsenal, they're on the table, and there was the whole contretemps with MacArthur. I think we would have had a much weaker case. In fact, I think that we shouldn't have used them, and I'm glad that we didn't use them, not just because having used them at that point would have made them mainstream rather than a one-off, but because that was not equivalent to the situation in which we found ourselves in World War II, and nor is this. And to say that is in no way to argue that there is no clear good guy and bad guy in this scenario. It's not to equivocate between Ukraine and Russia. I don't think there is any comparison whatsoever. But for the United States of America to use its own, under its flag, nuclear weapons in a foreign country would be an astonishing step, and one that I just cannot see as morally, leave aside Jim's analysis of the tactics, which I agree with, is morally justified in this circumstance.
So I totally agree on the tactical. I would not in any way risk a nuclear spiral just to enforce a taboo, against the use of even a very small nuclear weapon. I would say, all bets are off, and we're going to give everything the Ukrainians want in conventional terms. I totally agree with Phil, though. You have to say it's on the table and have the Russians thinking about it. And then, a strike on Kyiv would be a bigger matter. I think maybe this is the only way Putin could potentially win the war, is to kill Zelensky, take out the city center of Kyiv in a total scorched earth strategy, and hope it scares Western Europe, which it would. So I think there's some chance that would work. Obviously, an enormous risk. I think maybe then, again, to agree with Jim, that's when you take out the Black Sea fleet. But I'm a nuclear pacifist. I do not want to get NATO in a direct shooting war with Russia that in any way might go nuclear, because the risks are so high, including at the end of a escalation, to U.S. cities. And then just final point, we ran an editorial about this on Monday, but I just think it's insane to have a president musing about the possibility of nuclear Armageddon without a crash program to increase our defenses. We have maybe 44, I think it is, ground-based interceptors that are specifically designed to intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles. We need more, and we need to think about space, putting sensors in space, and ultimately it sounds crazy, but a lot of stuff that we thought was crazy 50 years ago and now reality is putting lasers in space, so you can have a layered defense to try to defeat a potential strike against the United States. Might not be in the offing in this crisis, probably won't be, but eventually it will be, whether it's from Russia down the line or North Korea or China and a conflict over Taiwan. It's just insane not to have more defenses, which enhance deterrence. You don't have to choose between deterrence and defenses. If you have a defense that makes a foreign leader think, well, maybe I'm going to go to the enormous risk of launching against the United States, is not even going to get through, that helps deter that foreign leader. So on that cheery note, let's go to a much more optimistic topic, one that we all enjoy talking about, which is how awesome Moink is. There is a robust competition in the pre-recording discussion about who gets to do a Moink read in any given episode. And Sarah Schutte got the long straw this time and is going to tell us about Moink.
I did indeed, Rich. Backed by popular demand, I'm here to tell you about Moink. 60% of U.S. pork production comes from one company, owned by the Chinese, and their hogs are given something called ractopamine, which is banned in 160 countries, including China. Yet you find it in your grocery aisle every day. There's a better way, and that way is Moink. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable, wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better. The Moink difference is a difference you can taste, and you can feel good knowing you're helping family farms stay financially independent too. You choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes, chicken breasts, pork chops, salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel anytime. Moink is very popular in my house, especially the whole chickens, which my mom turns into delicious pot pies. Shark Tank host Kevin O'Leary called Moink's bacon the best bacon he's ever tasted, and Ring Doorbell founder Jamie Siminoff jumped at the chance to invest in Moink. I love Moink products, and you will too. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/editors right now, and listeners of this show get free filet mignon in every order for a year. That's 1 year of the best filet mignon you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelled MOINK box.com/editors. That's moinkbox.com/editors.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. Everyone, please check out Moink. We all love it. It's an extraordinary product. So Phil Klein, New York Times, ran a big piece the other day on the woes of the California high-speed rail project. Not exactly breaking news here. This was clear it was going to be a debacle from pretty much the beginning. There have been signs of the unspooling disaster for a very long time, but this story underlined all the problems, lots of juicy details in the piece, one of which is that when California decided they were going to do this and they wanted to build a high-speed rail between Los Angeles and San Francisco and get people on rail between the two cities in like 2 hours and 40 minutes. Sounds wonderful. The French National Railroad came over and said, hey, we'd love to work with you guys, get a contract. And what we highly recommend is that in building a high-speed rail project between Los Angeles and San Francisco, what you should do is build a line that goes straight from Los Angeles to San Francisco, which would seem commonsensical advice. Of course, politics intervenes, and there are also major topographical issues, drilling through mountains and seismic issues and all the rest of it. But no, we're going to take this jaunt into the suburbs in the Mojave Desert, 41 miles out of our way. And with that, the French are like, this makes no sense. This thing is going nowhere. We're heading to North Africa instead. And they built a high-speed rail project that's actually been completed in Morocco. And another decision, highly controversial, is because it's so difficult to build near Los Angeles and San Francisco. Again, topographical issues, but all sorts of legal and NIMBY issues. The decision was made, they're going to start building in the Central Valley. So they have completed parts of this in the Central Valley. So, but it's the costs have ballooned. It's like $113 billion project and counting. No one knows where's the money is going to come from. So maybe they just end up with miles of a purported bullet train in the Central Valley, not connected to San Francisco, not connected to LA, and never, ever completed.
Yeah, so this is completely unsurprising for anyone who spent more than a couple minutes looking into this idea. I had actually done a deep dive for a feature story over a decade ago on this project. And basically everything that everyone was telling me back at the time came true. The problem is that basically, even though the LA to San Francisco route is the most rational and the only rational thing, it's also the most prohibitively expensive. The land acquisition is the most expensive, and you basically it's basically more there. It's more densely populated and so forth, which is both good for high-speed rail, but creates problems in terms of the actual building of it. But the issue was that the Obama stimulus, in part actually because of Biden, Mr. Amtrak, was big into pushing this whole speed rail thing. And this was as much of Joe Biden's failure as anyone's. And basically what had happened was they allocated this money to as part of the stimulus. Wisconsin, Ohio, and Florida, all with Republican governors, said no. So then all of the high-speed money went to California that was in the stimulus. And then the Obama administration said that the money was use it or lose it. So they basically, if they wanted to spend billions of dollars on a high-speed rail, they had to do something somewhere. And they figured that the Central Valley, there would be less of an issue with land acquisition, and it would be easier to create a rail line. But one thing that I realized when I was writing about this is that there's a huge issue with basically cutting through farmland, where you have large farmland and then suddenly a train goes through and it's hard to access the other part of the rest of your parcel of land. And the issue that high-speed rail creates is that because it moves faster, the railroad crossings have to be spread apart more. And so as a result of that, you might have to go with farm equipment miles out of your way to be able to get to the other side of the tracks to access the rest of your land. So there are all sorts of logistical problems. Plus, it was pretty clear the cost estimates were ridiculous. The potential ridership estimates were ridiculous. And again, the comparisons to Europe are ridiculous, because in Europe, if you take a train between London and Paris, you go from one city that isn't a car-based city to another. What are you going to do if you travel from San Francisco and you end up in downtown LA without a car, right? The truth is that the only place where high-speed rail would make sense in the United States is from DC to Boston, which is the only profitable part of Amtrak. But of course, it would be prohibitively expensive there because of all the clearances you need. You need wider clearances for high-speed rail. It's just, this was doomed from the word go, and multiple governors had to realize it and try to put the brakes on it. And yet there was always people plowing ahead. And what I find also particularly ironic before turning it over is that basically the impetus of this is the idea that it's a more carbon friendly, environmentally friendly alternative. And yet what's really doomed this is that the California has the most restrictive environmental regulations or construction of any place in the country.
Right.
So basically, opponents of this are using existing environmental regulations to basically tank something that was a project that was dreamed up by the environmentalists.
Yeah. So, Charlie, there's a great guy, Randall O'Toole, who writes about rail for the Cato Institute. And it's basically his mission in life is to harsh the buzz of all these quasi-religious rail enthusiasts. But I wrote about the California project yesterday and read this paper that O'Toole came out with last year. It's just terrific stuff. But he makes the point that when Japan came up with high-speed rail in the 60s, it seemed like the future, because then the cost of air travel was more expensive than rail. That's no longer the case. And also the Japanese were coming in a situation where most people were traveling by rail in the first place. So it's relatively easy to convert people who are, on slow trains to fast trains. But there's been no evidence that anyone's ever able to convert people who are driving or people who are flying into high-speed rail. And if we're talking high speed, jets are much faster than trains. These speeds that are always thrown around for these high speed rail projects are never really real, because they got to slow down and more hazardous sections. You actually have to stop the train if you're picking up people. This is why the Acela, is supposed to go 150 miles an hour. It's not on average at all. And a great advantage to flying also, it's not as though if you're flying from Los Angeles to San Francisco that you need a massive infrastructure project all along the route of the plane. You need an airport that, since people like to fly, there are the resources to pay for, and then you go over everything, and there's no NIMBY, there's no lawsuits, there's nothing. You just go over there, and then you land in the next airport. And then, to Phil's point, if you show up in the middle of San Francisco at a train station, how are you getting to where you need to go? You need a car. And this is why the interstate highway system is such a marvelous thing, because it connects you everywhere. You can get off at any exit and then go on the rest of the million miles of road in the United States and go directly where you want to go, where the best possible high-speed rail project is giving you a fixed terminus that is some distance from where you want to end up ultimately.
Look, one of the things that I missed in my previous answer about Ukraine is that we need those nuclear weapons to bomb the existing train infrastructure in the United States, which would be a winning platform for any presidential candidate, I continue to believe. Trains are useless in America, except in a handful of circumstances. As Phil said, Washington, D.C. to Boston, hooray. And freight. We move stuff around the country, stuff, not people, pretty well. But America is the opposite of Europe in this regard. In the United States, we move people by plane and goods by train. And every time that I hear someone suggesting that we should violate God's will and prefer trains to cars and planes, which is what he wants, I end up concluding that they have started with the conclusion. And the conclusion is, I like trains. That's where this comes from. There are always sandal-wearing, kale-eating types who like trains. They want to watch them. They want to obsess over where the track goes and what the elevation is and what the gauge is. I can hear some people saying, but Charles Cook's a roller coaster nut. That's different, you see. That's different. That's cool train spotting.
And you drive there.
Of course you drive there. Don't want to blaspheme.
Are you okay with monorails at amusement?
I'm okay with monorails inside amusement parks or airports. Monorail is a good way of getting from the parking lot in an airport to the plane.
So do you like trains in Europe? It's because different circumstances and they work?
Well, look, I think all trains should be bombed, but I have less... If I were organizing the schedule of nuking the train systems of the world, I would put Europe at the bottom.
How about commuter trains on your target?
Oh, they have to go. But Europe's a little bit different in this regard because it's really small. Mm-hmm. Now, Europe is obviously not small, but the routes that we're talking about, the routes that people try to use to sell American high-speed rail are just not equivalent.
Yeah.
And you can get under the sea, sous la Manche, from London to Paris. It's not very far. You can get from Paris to Brussels, not very far. You can get from Paris to Rome. There is no equivalent in the United States of those two cities with the geography in between and the population centers.
So, Charlie,
once you get beyond the East Coast, this actually becomes really silly.
On commuter trains, so when you lived in Connecticut, when you were in the New York area, you would take Metro North. And in your defense, you hated it. You absolutely hated it. But would you really rather have driven?
Every single day.
Really?
If I could have parked easily near our office, I would have driven every single day. I used to love the occasional days on which I drove into the city, either because, we have a public holiday or something and National Review would be working nevertheless, or because I had to pick something up.
And how do you think that drive would be if somebody had nuked Metro North? How long do you think that drive would take?
I don't understand the question. Can you explain it?
So if there are no trains, the driving would be ruined.
You guys lack the moral imagination to work out how this would in practice be achieved. Obviously, you don't drive the trains to the station in Manhattan or in Greenwich, Connecticut or wherever, and then drop the nuclear weapons. You take the trains into the middle of the desert, you sell tickets, maybe pay-per-view, and then you nuke them all in one fabulous single explosion. And then, with the tracks.
If everyone's driving by car, I mean, unless you basically assume flying cars in your analogy.
Oh, I see. You're not thinking about the fallout.
To funnel some people some fools off of the roads into the train, so you have an easier time driving.
All right, compromise. Everyone else takes the train. I drive, and then the rest of the country observes the biblical injunction to use the airports or the roads.
So let's get Jim in here. So Jim, this is I use the phrase quasi-religious. Progressives, they just love trains. It's not just kind of train nerds that Charlie's talking about who are obsessed with the gauge and the time they're coming and leaving and all that. It's a quasi-spiritual commitment to the planet. They think high-speed rail is a sign of enlightenment, of modernity, of the best of Europe. So you had Obama came up with a scheme for an 8,600-mile high-speed rail network. Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary and perhaps future president of the United States, says we need to be a global leader in high-speed rail. Now, rail is useful for freight, and one of the downsides of high-speed rail is that it's so fragile and has to be built to such specifications that you can't do any freight on it. You can only hope to move people, and then there are all these insuperable obstacles that we've talked about. But they still love it. They just love the idea of it.
Rich, my favorite aspect of the entire debacle of high-speed rail in California. Let's go into the Wayback Machine. Let's time travel all the way back to the distant past of 2015. And the HBO television series True Detective, which had an awesome first season, and then the second season, which was set in Southern California, was not nearly as good. But one of the highlights was Vince Vaughn playing this shady mob-connected businessman, and he was running a giant scam involving California's high-speed rail project. The whole idea, and I wrote about this in the Morning Jolt way back then, and the gist was it was involving purchasing land and then selling it back to the state. And because they'd gotten federal matching funds and they'd passed a proposition, basically all these mobsters and all these sleazy businessmen basically looked at the state as a giant pile of money that was just waiting to be taken. And I remember a few people, on the left side of the spectrum saying, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't make the state project look good. Don't they know that? Wait, no, high-speed rail is the wave of the future. You just wait. 7 years from now, in 2022, people will be enjoying high-speed rail. And of course, now we are, the New York Times article points out, not only, I love the projection, it may not be done this century. We're 22 years in. This has been going on for 3 decades, and it's still not there. And I think I'm glad the New York Times wrote this article. What I would love is just take that next step. They're almost to the precipice of the realization. We keep seeing all these say, oh, California is where the future is. And this is the wave. It's this endless, California is where big things happen. No, it isn't. California is where big dreams go to die. The only businesses that are not leaving California are the ones that cannot leave because of geography. You can't move the Central Valley farms. They're just not going to be able to find that climate anywhere else. You can't just pick up a farm and move it. But TV production, movie production, a lot of that's going up to Vancouver. Tech stuff, a lot of that stuff is going to Austin and the rest of the Sun Belt. Whole bunch of other businesses are like, you know what? Get me out of here. Can't deal with it anymore. And here is something that California progressives love. And they can't make it happen because they have these crazy ideas. Oh, let's run it through Bakersfield. They forgot the whole point of high-speed rail was to get you from one place to another really fast in a straight line. Running it through all these other communities doesn't make any sense because it's got to stop and let people on and off. So once again, reality, we're used to reality smacking liberals and progressives in the face. This time it used a brick.
So Charlie Cook, exit question to you while we're on the topic of travel and transportation. Rate your enthusiasm, because one of the issues here is if this high-speed rail project in California, if it even works, it'll be completed 20 years from now, we'll be living in a different world, and perhaps we'll have driverless cars that really make high-speed rail completely pointless. Rate your enthusiasm for a driverless car future. From 0, you have not even really accepted the era of automatic shift cars. To 10, this will be transportation nirvana.
Well, I'm an 8 with a caveat. And this caveat has the potential, if unfulfilled, to take it down to 0. I'm an 8 with the caveat that I don't have to have one. So providing that, no, I'm not being facetious for once. I think that driverless cars will be great. What I fear is that driverless cars will come along. The government will say, allowing people to drive is too dangerous. Insurance companies will see the benefit of banning driving, and we'll be left in this horrendous surveillance-happy world in which the only way of getting anywhere is to be tracked, because you are tracked if you take an airplane. Obviously, security mandates that. You're tracked if you take a train, and you will, by definition, be tracked if you take a driverless car, because the GPS system will be necessary for it to know where to go. And there'll be no way out. This is a little bit like Andrew Stutterford's obsession with keeping cash legal. He's worried that the internet's going to lead to a point at which the government says you're not allowed to have cash anymore. And he says, well, in which case, every single transaction will be registered. So it's partly a surveillance thing. It's also that I like driving. And I know you don't, Rich. And that's fine. I don't want you to drive if you don't want to. But I really like driving. And providing that the advent of driverless cars does not crowd out that great joy in my life, then I will be fine with it. And in fact, I'll be enthusiastic about it because, as you say, it will finally shut up the people who think we need high-speed rail everywhere.
So, Jim Garrity, we have a very subtle and well thought out 8 from Charlie Cook. Where are you, 0 to 10?
For myself, a driverless car is about a 2. For drivers in the state of Maryland, about a 9.
Phil Klein.
Let's point out, by the way, that's a Florida driver down there who's scoffing at Maryland.
No, I was just thinking, actually, that maybe I would make an exception to my rule for Miami.
Okay,
in Miami, maybe driving should be banned.
I used to hate Maryland drivers, and then it dawned on me, maybe it's a bit like Lord of the Flies. If you are raised in an environment where everyone around you is a crazy driver, maybe you just become a crazy driver by osmosis. You have to do that to survive.
Phil Klein.
I think maybe a 5 on driverless cars. I think it would be cool to have the option of turning a car into driverless mode. And like if I wanted to be driving, so I actually enjoy driving and like long road trips, but it would be nice, let's say, if I'm trying to get more mileage in, to maybe nod off for a bit, or having the ability to eat food that requires 2 hands without having
That's
to
why
stop.
on road trips, I always order McDonald's fries, because they're, especially a large, so they have a good boxy container and you can eat it, just dump them into your mouth with one.
I bet there'll be all sorts of horrible...
Somebody once tells this story about a time when I was on the campaign trail and gave him a ride and was driving through a snowstorm, and we stopped off with a calzone for calzones. And I started eating the calzone and dipping it in marinara while driving through the blizzard. And he was white knuckling.
Those campaign trips were always so good. I remember I was in Iowa once with a reporter who will go unnamed, who was filing something while driving. So he was, it was a long straight road, but he was kind of driving with his wrists while working on his BlackBerry with his thumbs.
I bet you $50 that when and it will be the federal government, of course, because everything is, when the federal government finally issues its regulations for driverless cars, I bet you they make it illegal to be nominally in charge of the car and have a drink, which will obviate the whole point for me.
So I'm a 9. It's not that I hate all driving. Road trips I'm okay with. When we were out in California for the Buckley dinner, friend of mine, a colleague, was going to stay over in Santa Barbara for a day or two and was having to drive from LA to Santa Barbara. He's like, Rich, I'm sure you would hate doing this. I'm like, no, that'd be, a weekend drive in a beautiful part of the country. Absolutely. But routine driving, I just think is so, it's a time suck, and traffic is horrible. Driverless cars raises the prospect of the end of traffic jams, which would just be an enormous increase in efficiency for the entire country. So I favor Charlie's proposed constitutional amendment to prohibit any ban on actual human driving. Otherwise, I think the driverless car will be an extraordinary invention, and I can't wait. With that, let's pause and hear from our third sponsor of this episode, Segura. We know it can be difficult to make time for ourselves in this fast-paced world we live in, but it's important to take a step back and enjoy the finer things in life. Sometimes that means sitting back and enjoying a nice cigar. Introducing Segura, the next generation of cigars online. Join Segura and be the first to see cutting-edge products, exclusive offers, and limited edition gear. Whether you're looking for top-shelf brands like Davidoff, industry staples like Fuente, or super rare blends from Vihaye and others, Segura is your one-stop shop for all your cigar needs. Explore its curated selection of industry content that includes reviews, food and beverage pairings, beginner questions, and much more. Join the Segura Lounge and connect with fellow cigar enthusiasts alongside its staff, experts, and manufacturers, and be part of a one-of-a-kind cigar community to help relax. Enjoy a free gift from Segura when you spend $49 or more at Segura.com. Use the code WELCOME at checkout to receive a free Founders Box. This is an expertly curated sampler with a $45 value for free. Give back to yourself. Segura. Shop, connect, share. Visit Segura.com. That's Cigora.com. Again, the code WELCOME for that free Founders Box. Please check it out. So, Jim Garrity, we have another Kanye controversy. These are happen quite often in our pop culture and specifically impact the right. Every couple years, we had Kanye wearing a White Lives Matter t-shirt the other day, a big Tucker Carlson interview where he said, heterodox things, and just in time for some people on the right to say, wow, Kanye, what a truth teller, what a champion for our side. He unleashes some anti-Semitic material, a tweet that gets deleted or suppressed by Twitter, also an Instagram post that got suppressed by Meta. What do you make of it?
Kanye West is a walking controversy machine. I think people probably remember his Oval Office meeting with former President Trump. He was, up until recently, married to another walking controversy machine, and both of them have become experts in figuring out how to get the media to treat every little thing that they do and say as some earth-shattering controversy. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Kanye West. I don't want to spend much time thinking about Kanye West. And I really don't like the idea that every time he utters something, it's meant to be treated as this, grandiose, this thing that I have to pay attention to. I think, we've had this blurring of the lines between entertainers in politics and leaders in politics. Kanye West, we have, going back to Katrina, George W. Bush doesn't care about black people. I mean, he's demonstrated the moment you say something, that people agree with, they will embrace you without, they'll just forget about everything else you've said in the past. People are fickle. People have short attention spans. People have short memories. And, his most recent comment, which was pretty blatant, just scorchingly anti-Semitic, was like, I'm going to come after all of you Jews or something. It was something that was very clearly
DEFCON 3 or something.
Right, DEFCON.
He could have gone to DEFCON 1 in his defense.
why am I supposed to care about this guy? Why should, like he, in a couple of months, he's going to go out and say something completely in the other direction. And people go, oh, did you see what Kanye said? Almost like, maybe I'm just like responding to the inevitable clickbait headline. You won't believe what Kanye West said today. Oh, you know what? I probably am going to believe it. Because his career runs on controversy. Of course, he said something controversial. So
yeah, sorry.
No, I'm tired that we have to pretend like this is something significant. I don't think he brings lots of voters with him. I've been hearing about how he's going to bring African Americans to the Republican Party for a long time now. And I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think African Americans look to Kanye West for political leadership. I don't think people look to Kim Kardashian for political leadership. This is a very tired phenomenon in our politics that I'd like to think that a more mature country would be able to distinguish between entertainers and leaders and stop blurring the lines.
Jim's tired being tired, but this is it is not a new phenomenon, not just in our culture generally, but especially on the right, where basically my entire adult lifetime, conservatives have been grasping for a piece of the celebrity pie because the left has the lion's share, so we're always desperate to have a couple of our own, and that clearly is playing into the Kanye thing.
Yeah, I think the thing is that Kanye has this, to Jim's point, I think it's similar to Trump, that he has this ability to say and do things that get people to talk about what he's saying and doing. And like Trump, I think he has a view that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Whether you're attacking Kanye or you say he's crazy, or if you think he's great or onto something, you love him, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that everyone's talking about him. When Kanye was on Tucker, everyone was talking about it. I woke up the other morning to texts from family members about, did you hear about the Kanye anti-Semitic rant? Colleagues at NR were debating it. It was all over Twitter. Everyone was talking about it. And he clearly has various mental health struggles, and he goes through you combine that with an interest in sort of generating attention for stuff. And I think the thing that conservatives need to be leery about with dealing with the celebrity of stuff is that if somebody goes through various cycles like Kanye, at some point, he's going to end up saying some stuff that you agree with. And during that time, you don't want to jump on the Kanye bandwagon and uphold him as some sort of great, force that's going to push conservatism. I mean, it was, he was talking on Tucker Carlson about Margaret Sanger and the founding of Planned Parenthood and the eugenics and so forth. And you're like, wow, like when's the first time that a lot of these people in his audience are exposed to the history of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood? But the flip side is he's going to want to be shocking and say all sorts of crazy anti-Semitic stuff that's going to generate attention.
Charlie, Kanye West, Beatles, yes or no?
I am offended by the question and refuse to answer it. Actually, that's the best one you've done, though, because you usually put in someone like Taylor Swift.
Well, no, I'm serious. I was serious about Taylor Swift, not about Kanye.
This will be my last appearance on the Editors podcast. It's been a pleasure. No, Kanye West is a genius. He's also a lunatic. Those things often go hand in hand. And, if anyone has decided, based on a few snippets of conversation from Kanye West, to tie themselves to him, then they're a fool. I mean, it's entirely possible if this is what you want to do with your life, just to say, I like Kanye on this and not on that. But the desperation you do see, particularly on the right, to find a celebrity that echoes or represents what we believe, can lead us to some bad places. And this is one of them. Kanye West is not a hero. He's not a politician. He's not a philosopher. He's a musical genius and an entertainer and a fascinating person, I have to say. If you have a very high tolerance for people being loony, as I do, then, Kanye West is is really interesting. He's clearly reading all sorts of different things and absorbing all sorts of information all the time. And some of it he processes well or in ways that are valuable. And some of it he really doesn't. And because he's extremely famous and influential, he's invited to play out his processing live on television or on Twitter or on the radio or on his records or whatever he does. And, I think there's only one way to look at that. And that's the same way that you would have looked at Elvis or John Lennon or anyone else in that position, as a musician first who also lives in the world and has thoughts on it, but thoughts that certainly should not be, as the House Republicans' Twitter account did, endorsed and amplified in any systematic sense.
So, Jim Garrity, I don't have anything else on Kanye West. So I'm going to have to go exit question. I'm just going to do general politics, although Kanye might have a huge effect on the midterms. Who knows? But I'm going to ask you to give us your current red wave meter is pointing to a trickle, to a gently lapping wave, to a 3-foot wave, substantial. It's not going to take out any structures or anything, but, you can feel its force, or surf's up, dude.
I prefer when you do numerical measurements instead of meteorological ones. And I'm in red wave territory, less than a tsunami, more than a trickle.
So surf's up.
Yeah, so it's going to be a good year. I think Wisconsin and Nevada have really shifted in Republicans' ways in the last couple of weeks.
Jim, is the wave big enough to get one of those curly bits where the surfboard can go all the way under it and through?
Let me get out my surfer terminology thesaurus here. No, it's looking like a good year. There'll be. I just completed something about how in Colorado it would have been nice to give Michael Bennett a tougher year. Joe O'Dea is trailing pretty consistently by about 7 points. So there are a couple ones that slipped through the fingers, but it's going to be a pretty good.
So how about Georgia?
I'm surprised we haven't seen more polling since the Herschel Walker revelations.
We had one that was down by 3, right?
Yeah. My suspicion is you won't see a huge shift in it. I think the really interesting question is, does it keep Warnock below 50? And if it's below 50, it goes to a runoff. We don't resolve this till January. Yes, it's entirely possible that the fate of the Senate comes down to that. And I think I feel better about Walker's chances in a runoff than I do on election day. Meaning that than him leading on election day. I think if it comes down to that, it'll become more like old news. Probably people will know whether the control of the Senate comes down to it. And if it's Democrats have 49, Republicans have 50 seats, and it all comes down to this. Whole lot of Georgia Republicans will say, "To heck with this! I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Walker."
Yeah, there are two ways to look at it. I have a friend who worked for Sharon Angle, the terrible candidate out in Nevada who ran against Harry Reid. And he was saying, a friend of his was commenting on that race. When voters hear you're crazy, they still might give you a look. And if you do or say something crazier or crazy again, then they just forget it. That's what happened to Sharon Angle. But then also there's the absorption theory. A month is a long time for news to be absorbed and kind of justified and other things to come up. So I could still go either way on Georgia. Just Jim. So I agree with you on Wisconsin and Nevada, but where are you on Pennsylvania? Because you lose Pennsylvania, you don't take Georgia. Wisconsin and Nevada are not enough.
It's been fascinating to watch how the Fetterman's health issue has steadily grown. I think most people would say Fetterman, if he's favored, is now only nominally or favored by a small
51,
amount.
52%, something like that.
Yeah, Oz is running a much better campaign. I got to give him credit. I was making fun of him earlier this year. He's buckled down. He's gotten a lot better as a candidate. It's still not the easiest state for Republicans to win. But I do, and the debate isn't until October 25th. I kind of wonder if that debate's going to really hinge on a lot. Mm-hmm. It's very late in the cycle. People may have voted early, but it's just kind of this sense of there's been so much hype about this that if Fetterman comes out and struggles, then I think, then maybe people say, you know what, they've been lying to us the whole time. He's really in trouble. To heck with this. If he's fine, then maybe this, buckles everything down. And I think it's a purple to blue state. And I kind of feel like that might be enough to take Fetterman over the top. In other words, I would not bet the mortgage on an Oz win, but I also don't think you can completely dismiss it either.
So Phil Klein's is a surf up?
Yeah, I'd say it's about a 3-foot wave. It's more than a trickle, but not, we're not in tsunami territory, in part because I've sort of emphasized this whenever it comes up, but that I think that it's, they're starting from, it's not like 2010 or 2014 where Democrats had bigger majorities. So certainly in 2010, when you get 60 something seats, Democrats had a historically large majority at that point. So I think that Republicans will gain a lot of seats. It just won't be, 40 or 60 like 94, 2010, just because it's so narrow to begin with. But I think that it'll be a red wave. And the big question on the Senate side is how much the races become national. Are people thinking, I want Mitch McConnell instead of Chuck Schumer? I want Republicans to be in there to block Biden. And the candidate is secondary, or are the Dr. Oz's or Herschel Walker's going to take on enough weight to basically prevent Republicans from being able to capture the Senate?
So, Charlie, is the red wave totally macking? Yes or no?
Ooh, I don't know what that word means, so I have to be careful in my answer here, in case I inadvertently praise Taylor Swift or something. But
yeah, according to the surfing glossary, I just pulled up macking, huge waves breaking, or when it's really fun and powerful.
Maybe semi-macking. Is that in there? I think that it's going to be a wave. I think that will be the word that's used. The wave will be more pronounced in some areas than others. And in maybe one case, it will be blunted by a surprise gravitational pull from the moon.
Yeah, I think it's a moderate wave. Some, maybe a little higher than 3 feet, but somewhere in between 3 feet and the surf's up. So with that, let me pause and do a quick plug for NR Plus, our digital subscription service. Your way around our metered paywall. Your way if you sign up and log in to see 90% fewer ads, especially none of those obnoxious ads that might be distracting you when you're trying to read our content. If you're a member of NR Plus, you can also dig deeper into our community. You can comment on articles and blog posts. You can be part of our private Facebook group. You can be invited to exclusive calls and events with our writers and editors and various conservative figures. So it's a great deal all around. We have first-time pricing for new subscribers very often. Maybe I think probably right now, actually, as we speak, because we've been running a subscription drive the last week or so. So please, if you haven't signed up already, join tens of thousands of your fellow National Review readers and do so. On top of everything, it's a really important way to support our valuable journalism. With that, let's hit a few other things before we go. Jim Garrett, are you engaged in the very Zan DeSanctis type activity of apple picking?
Yeah, we do this around Columbus Day every year. Go to an orchard in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. A little bit unusual this year. There was almost no apples left on the trees, which when you think of, if you're there to get lots of apples, well, then it's bad. If you're more interested in just having a nice walk, getting fresh air, weather was terrific, and later on eating apple, donuts at the country store, then it was perfectly fine. I didn't have any problem with that or anything. But no, it was a nice prelude to the Jets win over the Dolphins, which is my other lighter item of the week on our 2-game winning streak. So all in all, it was a nice Sunday.
So Phil, your plans for your Sukkot came together nicely.
Yes, I think I said on a previous episode a while back that I was sort of envisioning new plans for a sukkah, making some changes for those who are unaware. For about a week every fall, Jews will take meals in a sort of a small hut, a temporary structure. It has certain origins in the harvest, but also it's to commemorate the 40-year journey that Jews took out of Egypt after the Exodus. And so there are all sorts of different rules. It has to be some sort of structure. It has to have 3 walls. It has to have some sort of roofing material, but the roof still has to allow you to see through to be able to see stars. So there are various, it has to be an organic material. And so I drew up some plans, and with the use of PVC piping and some bamboo, I was able to pull it together, and it's been up since Saturday night, and it's it's held. So hopefully it lasts for the week, and they can. Hopefully, I didn't do my architectural plans. Didn't include structural engineering or consulting with a physicist, so I can't vouch for how high it winds it could.
But you know what's going to happen? Kanye is going to come over and knock it down.
So congratulations and good luck with that, Phil. Charlie, what did you do?
I don't remember now. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
No, Gators game.
That's right. I went to the swamp. It was the first time I'd been. Really is difficult to explain to English people the sheer scale of college football in the United States. And I don't just mean relative to professional sports, although that's true as well. I just mean in and of itself. The swamp holds 88,000 people, and there were 88,000 people there. It's one of the largest stadiums in the world. The top 15 stadiums in the United States, I believe, are all college football stadiums. And of course, the party.
I had no idea.
Yeah, the biggest stadium in England is Wembley Stadium. That's 90,000. But that's our national stadium. That's what we use for everything.
Yeah. So is the swamp, is it just a bowl, or does it have two tiers?
It's not really a complete bowl. Each side is a little bit different in height and style. So I don't actually know. Like Phil,
it's not a bowl, but it's not like a 2-tiered stadium. Here, I'm looking at it now. I see.
Yeah, it has 4 sides to it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, the scale of it and also of the party that the games generate, it's just astonishing. Just a mile of tailgating and revelry and celebration. And the good part was that the Gators won the game. They haven't been very good this year, but they won 24-17, which made it pretty exciting. They won the game in the 4th quarter, and thereby confirmed and extended my strange little record, which is every time I have first gone to see a team that I support live, they've won. It's true of Manchester United, the Yankees, the Gators, even the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, and the Jaguars, amazingly enough, given how infrequently they win.
So, to my shame, I've never seen a big-time college football game. I've got to go down and see an SEC game. I've seen Navy football games back in the day. Doesn't count. I've obviously seen UVA football games. They don't count either. So I do a regular hit on the New York radio station up here, talk radio, #1 talk radio in New York, WABC, the Bernie and Sid show every Monday morning. Bernie McGuirk, former Imus producer and just a great guy. And he passed away last week, quite young, cancer, just terrible. And he was just such a good guy, such a natural at New York radio to make it New York radio. You need a New York voice. And I just don't mean the accent. I mean the sensibility, and just Bernie had it perfectly, because it's who he was. I mean, he was born in the Bronx. He briefly worked as a taxi driver. So that New York sensibility is like really salt of the earth. It's really acerbic. It's really funny, commonsensical, no BS. But then underneath all that, a deep vein of compassion. And that was true to Bernie as well. So Bernie McGuirk, rest in peace. So with that, it's time for our editor's picks. Jim Garrity, what's your pick?
Well, I don't want to turn into a cliche of picking my colleague Charlie Cook every single week, but his most recent observation that the New York Times has bent over backwards to try to put... The New York Times has noticed that Joe Biden often says things that aren't true. But then they've decided to put it under the headline, Biden, storyteller-in-chief, spins yarns that are often unravel. Charlie just takes them to the woodshed, and hilariously and deservedly so.
Phil Klein, what's your pick?
I'm actually going to pick our editorial, California Crazy. We talked a little bit about the high-speed rail fiasco, but oftentimes we debate what to do and what to editorialize about. And so many things come up with California that we could honestly write an editorial every day about some insane thing that's happening in California. So we have an editorial out today that it sort of tries to round up some of the recent insanity just over the past few weeks. If you want to catch up, I suggest reading it. It's up on the site now.
Charlie Cook.
My piece is by Luther Abel, and it is, yes, partly because it's bashing the Germans, one of my favorite pastimes, but mostly because it's about intolerance and censorship. The piece, actually a post, is titled "The German Speech Police Come for Memes." And it's about, well, the German speech police raiding people for making jokes and saying things on the internet that the German government does not like. And I think it's worth my pick just for its opening line, which is, "We have ways of making you not talk."
So my pick is a Dominic Pino piece on the California rail project that we were talking about earlier. Dominic is nearly omnicompetent, it seems, when it comes to policy. And I think there are few others, if you had a choice, that you'd pick above Dominic on the center right, just to write like a policy piece about anything in 15 minutes. I mean, he just knows so much and is so authoritative. And this was just another example of it. So that's it for us. You've been listening to a National Review podcast. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this game without the express written permission of National Review Magazine is strictly prohibited. This podcast has been produced by the incomparable Sarah Schutte, who makes us sound better than we deserve. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Phil. Thanks to NetChoice, Moink, and Segura. And thanks especially to all of you for listening. We're the editors, and we'll see you next time.